Hi, I'm Velshi with MSNBC. Even with the 2020 election behind us, there is still a major voting rights issue playing out in the courts involving the Voting Rights Act. I'm teaming up with the National Constitution Center for a more perfect union, and I'm joined by Jeff Rosen. He's the president and CEO of the National Constitution Center. Good morning, Jeff. I wanted to talk about the seminal legislation from the civil rights movement. It's a conversation we started last week. It passed in 1965. What's at stake in this Supreme Court case that's being argued this week?
Well, there's a huge amount at stake, Ali. What's at stake is a part of the Civil Rights Act called Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. That was actually passed in 1982, and it forbids any voting practices that make it harder for minorities to participate in the political process and elect representatives of their choice. Congress's basic goal was to say you don't have to prove discriminatory intent, but as long as a voting practice makes it harder for minorities to vote, it's illegal. Now, the question is how we should interpret that. Arizona has passed a bunch of practices recently that make it harder for minorities to vote. They have to drop off their ballots in the precinct where they live, and they have to drop them off in person, and they can't have a bunch of people collect the ballots for them. The question is that illegal? Now, challengers, led by Republican attorneys general, say you have to look at the state as a whole, and as long as the overall impact isn't all that great, then there's no problem. The Biden administration is saying, let's keep the traditional test that says, look at the history of racially polarized voting, look at the history of racial discrimination, and if the overall effect makes it harder for minorities to vote, then it's illegal. There's one even more important aspect of it. Some justices, led by Justice Clarence Thomas, say that entire section of the Voting Rights Act is unconstitutional because it violates the prohibition on any kind of race consciousness and that the Constitution has to be colorblind. So basically, if the Supreme Court narrows the effect of this provision, it's going to make it harder to challenge all of the voting barriers that states are adopting recently, supposedly to prevent voter fraud, and it's going to have huge consequences for how easily people can vote in the United States.
So this is one of those cases where we're looking at what the Supreme Court does. We're also looking at what Arizona and Iowa and Pennsylvania and other states are doing right now as it relates to people's abilities to vote. Jeff, as always, thank you for your time. Jeff Rosen is the president and the CEO of the National Constitution Center.